Your Oregon Ducks victorious against my Oregon State Beavers down in Corvallis, 49-14. Total yardage was 546 to 309. Rushing was 240 to 130. And really not much to talk about on the competitiveness, I think, of this game outside of the first quarter.
Yeah.
Oregon running away with it starting in the second and then just destroying the Beavs in the second half, outscoring them 27-0. So Oregon improves to 3-0. Oregon State is now 2-1 in one of the weirdest feeling civil wars of my lifetime.
Yeah.
The Beavs get absolutely blown out at home by your Ducks.
I feel like there's three different pathways to the conversation. What our takeaways are on Oregon, what our takeaways are on Oregon State, and then the general feeling of the rivalry. I feel like there's three different tracks you can go down. I will start with Oregon because to me it was, my glasses are on here. It was the biggest thing. Oregon fan desperately needed this. You needed to have the proof and the evidence that this is a good team, and if they don't do things to shoot themselves in the foot constantly, and they can solidify their offensive line, this is in there somewhere. And it was the one thing last week coming off of another tight, uncomfortable, how the hell is this happening game against Boise State, that in the second half, at least, I felt like they found themselves defensively until the big runs happened after turnovers, and they found themselves offensively until they turned the football over. Like there was something there that I could grab a hold of and say, I think there's a good team in here somewhere. Now they just got to stop doing the dumbest thing possible at the worst possible time, which is what they've largely done through the first 2 weeks of the season. But so much of what happened to them against Idaho and so much of what happened to them against Boise was self-inflicted. It was just not catching a snap or snapping when the quarterback's not ready and fumbling, or a quick turnover change when you're driving to take a 7-0 or take a 7-point lead turning into a 10-point lead or a 14-point lead, you fumble, you give up a 70-yard touchdown. So much of that stuff is self-inflicted. And they finally, for the first time this season, got out of their own way, and they settled on an offensive line combination. Poncho was in at center, Strother was in at guard. You still did not have Bedford play. And Dylan Gabriel wasn't even breathed on this weekend. He wasn't touched. I don't know, on his long touchdown run, I don't think anybody laid a finger on him.
I think there was a finger at the last second.
A last second finger at the pylon.
Yeah.
I mean, what they did to protect him and to control the line of scrimmage, It was a sight for sore eyes, man, because that line was atrocious the first 2 weeks of the season. And so it was just a nice deep breath for Oregon fan of saying, like, sure, the rivalry is a whole other part of it, but just like, okay, I think there's a good football team in there. Now we have some evidence. Now, where do they go from here? I don't know. But at least we have the evidence that they have the ability of being a good football team.
Where they go from here is 5-0. Because they're going to have a bye, and then they get UCLA and Michigan State. They're going to win those games.
But I think the point is that those games aren't the games that Oregon's going to be judged on this year. And when you're struggling against inferior opponents, it doesn't leave you hope against the better opponents.
Right.
And so hopefully you go do this again 2 more times, and then we find out on October 12th.
Barring injury, though, I think we're looking at Ohio State, Michigan. Yeah, I don't think they have a quarterback, so like their defensive line's nasty, but your offensive line, you stuck with a group this week, and you showed that, Bedford comes back. He's going to take the right guard spot from Strother, but Cornelius and Connerly, you had Poncho at center. He had no problems, no snap issues.
No.
Harper's been fine at left. I think that was, when we talked about this game on Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, I can't remember what day it was, but I just remember saying, like, my biggest concern is the pass rush. Oregon State has not had a legitimate pass rush in far too long.
No.
And I hadn't seen any evidence this year, even against Idaho State and San Diego State, that pass rush was something that was finally going to arrive. Even with a questionable or shaky offensive line performance in 2 weeks, I still think you had horses on that front that were going to make life difficult for Oregon State, and they more than did that. They basically neutralized. It did not exist. Dylan Gabriel could have done the same thing had no Oregon State defensive line been on the field.
It felt like 7-on-7 at times, to be honest with you.
It absolutely did. The read on the quarterback run, the long run that he had, I mean, they highlighted it on the broadcast. Oregon State completely had a breakdown. There was one player to be taken care of. He got taken care of. Gabriel's gone.
Yeah, he chased after the back, and he thought he would have some help behind him. He said, I'll take the pitch, man, and it didn't work out.
They shut down Oregon State's rushing attack. The Beavs technically finished with a 4.1-yard average and 130 on the ground. That is very deceiving. That is an absolute lie. I watched the game.
A lot of it was McCoy
Hankerson
scrambles.
and Griffin was under 3 yards per carry. To your point, yes, it was McCoy. The passing attack, something I was dreading going into this matchup or questioning, it didn't exist. 170 yards is also a lie to me. I watched it. They could not move the ball down the field. This one was ugly. It felt optimistic kind of at first because their opening drive ended with them kicking the ball in the center's butt, which we can have a different conversation. Like, you took our kicker. We don't have a kicker. The second drive, they scored the touchdown to tie the game. That was encouraging. By the second quarter, I think you could just watch that game and go, yeah, there's a difference here. And the second half didn't shock me whatsoever. You are right, though. There are three conversations to be had: the Oregon stuff, the Oregon State stuff, and the rivalry itself.
Yeah.
But to your point earlier, Oregon showed you this is why they had hype. This is why they had noise. This is what they can do. Now, they might actually even get better on the offensive line if Bedford comes back soon. I didn't think he would play in this game. I just kind of had a weird hunch that they were going to try to get through this non-conference stuff without him.
And you got a bye week
And
now.
you have a bye week. So then if he comes back for, was it UCLA, then Michigan State?
UCLA on the road, then Michigan State at home.
If he does that, that gives him a lot of time to rest up and get better. And that group did a great job on Saturday.
I feel like the biggest mistake that, not just Oregon State fan, but hell, even reporters who cover the team who mask themselves as fans, but like partially reporters, it's kind of weird. They allowed Oregon doing a lot of detrimental things to themselves the first 2 weeks to convince them that there wasn't a big talent gap here. And that was the one area that I was.
Well, that would be ridiculous to
It
do.
is. I mean, that was said by a reporter for the Oregonian that there's not a massive talent gap here. It's like, yeah, there is, dude, and there should be. Unfortunately, because of what they went through in the last year, you lost your coach, you lost your conference, and you lost half your damn roster. Like, yeah, there's going to be a talent gap here. If Oregon is not going to come into this game and do things to hurt themselves, you have no chance to win. That's just the reality of it. If they throw a couple of picks, fumble a snap, have a bunch of penalties that call back big plays, then you got a puncher's chance because you're tough and you're physical and you're playing at home, and it's not an easy place to go in and win. Oregon hadn't won there since 2018. If they're going to be efficient and not turn the football over and not have penalties, you don't have it. It's just about how long can you hang in there because of what the talent gap is between the two programs. And that's where I kind of wanted to talk about Oregon State, because I understand that it's a demoralizing loss, and 49-14, the final score is embarrassing. Again, I think a lot of that was this optimism that existed that you could potentially win the game from some fans last week. But I actually came away from their first half. They followed their game plan to a T. They completely controlled the time of possession. Oregon had
dominated the time of possession.
Oregon had 3 possessions in the first half.
Yeah, but that was also because you guys scored so quickly.
No doubt, but it also was because we couldn't get off the field. You kept picking up third downs, and we couldn't tackle him. McCoy was scrambling around. Like, the opening drive of the game, he had a 3rd and 15. We're like, all right, this is easy. We're going to get off the field. Nope, he got 30, 40 yards on the run. So I actually came away from the game considering what in my mind is a massive talent gap, impressed with how tough and physical they were. I knew they couldn't throw the football downfield. That being considered, I loved their RPO game and the little quick stick routes and the quick slants that they were hitting. They don't have a downfield threat, so you're playing with a hand tied behind your back.
Walker's their best target.
Walker's their best target. He had a really nice game for an in-state kid. That was cool, but I don't know. I came away with, this was a 25-14 game with 6 minutes to go in the third quarter. The problem is when you run this, we're going to, shrink the clock and shrink the game, you got to mix stops in. And they literally didn't get a stop the entire game. And so eventually the talent just overwhelms you, and Oregon didn't make any mistakes. But let's not sit here and act like this was 42-0 at the first half. It was a 1-possession game at halftime. Yeah. You held them to a field goal in their opening drive of the third quarter. That was self-inflicted because it should have been a touchdown, and he missed Tez Johnson on the quick out route. But that's a 25-14 game halfway through. You hung tough as long as you could, and Oregon didn't do anything to hurt themselves.
We'll get to the Beavs side of that because Oregon obviously did what Oregon has been trying to do all year. They finally did that. Gabriel's numbers, he's going to set history.
He was amazing.
He was unbelievable. Breaking news, when you give him time, he's really good.
I mean, even in the first 2 weeks without time, his completion percentage is 84%, which is wild.
But you and I had talked about, right? The Idaho game was a little deceiving. The numbers were really good, but there's a lot of dinking and dunking. That was kind of like an extension of the run game. Boise, he was good. He had trouble picking up blitzes, as did the offensive line. And so you're like, I know the numbers are great and he's good. It feels weird. Well, it turns out the offensive line makes a massive difference to making all of those numbers look much better. I was outside at halftime, and my neighbor across the street had gotten a piece of my mail, and she was wearing a beef thing, and her husband was a duck. I was like, "Oh, you guys are house divided."
Hey,
She
go
goes,
Civil
"Yeah."
War.
We're going to a friend's house. I go, "Well, we're only down 1 score," and she goes, "Yeah." And I go, "I know." And so, like, I hear what you're saying.
It didn't feel like Oregon
It
State was going to
didn't-
win the game at all. I'm not
Not at
arguing
all,
that, but I'm just
no.
saying there is, like, I think we just have to be honest here. There's a massive talent gap between these two teams.
But you're talking about one individual in the media, and you and I, we didn't disagree on that. That was the thing we talked about last week.